Well, good evening. Welcome to the third installment of the Global Public Health Lecture Series for 2018. And this lecture series is co-sponsored by the Global Public Health Program and the Institute for Health and Humanities. And tonight, we're very fortunate to have Joe Russell speaking to us about the Republic of Georgia's food safety system. Let me tell you a little bit about Joe. He has a really fascinating background and one that really eminently qualifies him for the talk he's going to give tonight. Joe earned his Master's of Public Health from the University of Washington, emphasizing epidemiology and environmental health practice. He started his career as a food safety specialist and served over 30 years in governmental public health. He recently retired from his position as the Chief Executive Officer of a full-service public health agency, that is the Flathead City County Health Department, where he operated the divisions of environmental health, community health nursing, WIC, health promotion, and a federally qualified health center that offered primary medical care, behavioral health, and dental care. In 2006, Joe co-chaired the Council to Improve Foodborne Outbreak Response until his retirement. CIFR, FOR, is in the forefront of creating and marketing innovative foodborne outbreak investigation techniques and reinforces the need for the core disciplines to work as a team when responding to foodborne illness. And those core disciplines are epidemiology, environmental health, and laboratory work. Currently, Joe works as adjunct instructor with the National Center for Biomedical Research and Training at Louisiana State University. That organization is one of 7 that make up the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium, a professional alliance sponsored through the Department of Homeland Security. With this organization, Joe was part of a team that developed a course titled Team Approach to Foodborne Outbreak Response. And it was first developed in 2009, and then it was recertified last year. He was also part of the development team for Managing Food Emergencies, Strategies for a Community Response. This is a unique course that brings together a team consisting of public health, agriculture, and emergency managers to work together in the event of a widespread food emergency. Joe teaches these courses and continues to develop similar curriculum around the country. Joe has taught over 50 classes throughout the country and consulted to and with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, both in and outside of this country. In 2016 and 2017, he consulted to the Republic of Georgia on food safety and foodborne outbreak response. And I think we'll be hearing more about that tonight. So please join me in welcoming Joe Russell to the lecture series.
All right. Well, thanks, Peter, for that great introduction. That's probably one of the better ones I get. Usually it's, hey, you, get out of my way. I'm going to talk to you about food safety in the Republic of Georgia. I do have a unique opportunity. I'm an epidemiologist, to do environmental health. And to go over there and work with their government on foodborne outbreak response and general food safety was a real privilege to me. And I don't know if you know exactly where Georgia is, but it's a long ways from Montana. It took me about a day to get there. I think the first time I went over, I flew through Atlanta, then Amsterdam, and then the first time through Turkey, and then to Georgia. But it's a long ways. It's interesting that if you're all good with geography, I would guess, better than I was when I first thought about Georgia. I thought, well, you know, it can't be that far from Europe. Well, it's a long ways from Europe. This is basically due south is Saudi Arabia and Iran. So you're quite a ways east of where you'd think you'd be, especially when you get into the culture of Georgia. Interesting about Georgia, and I'm going to go through some history and some cultural stuff to kind of give you an idea of what I did as I moved through my work product there. So to the north is Russia. To the south is Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. The west is the Black Sea. And it's interesting that Georgia is basically two mountain ranges that go north and south. The Greater Caucasus to the north and the Lesser Caucasus to the south are basically their borders. And the Black Sea, which if you look at the latitude of Georgia, it looks pretty far north, but it's very subtropical in parts of there, basically because of the Black Sea. So it lends itself to citrus growing. They grow tons of tea and lots of citrus. And you'd look at that and you'd go, wow, that seems a little too far north for that. But their climate is really dictated by the Black Sea. Give you an idea how big the Republic of Georgia is. It's about 27,000 square miles, which is about the same size as Oklahoma, 3.7 million population. So if you think about maybe some of the more populated areas in the east, 3.7 million population, Georgia's a fairly rural area when you think about it from a population density perspective. Okay, I am going to give you my whirlwind tour of the culture of I was in Tbilisi, which is the capital. I lived in terrible squalor when I was there. That's a Courtyard by Marriott. That's where I stayed. It's an amazing courtyard. I've stayed in courtyards all over the country. This one is awesome. Bar, restaurant, workout room. I did not suffer over there at all. This is an old Soviet bloc country. Everyone knows that? This was part of the USSR. That's Mother Georgia. You always hear Mother Russia and everything. I've never seen the statue, but that's Mother Georgia. And it's interesting about the Georgia culture. Mother Georgia has a bowl of wine in one hand for those friendly visitors, and a sword in the other for those not so friendly visitors that go to Georgia. So, erected in 1958. It's an aluminum statue. I forget how tall it is, but it just stands over the landscape there. This is a fortress that sits on the hill over Tbilisi. This is old Tbilisi. This is the best part of Tbilisi. This is a fortress that sits over there. It was started in the 4th century AD. Most of the walls were built in the 8th century AD. Most of the walls in the 8th century AD were actually built by an Egyptian. So interesting how things came to culture in Georgia and Tbilisi. This is the Holy Trinity Cathedral. You can't actually tell. The Georgians are 71% of Georgia is Eastern Orthodox, and this is the 3rd highest cathedral, Eastern Orthodox cathedral in the world. It's an amazing structure. You go in there, if you understand Eastern Orthodox. I don't understand Eastern Orthodox very well, but we had folks that were with us in our team that if you didn't have a scarf on your head as a female, you couldn't go in. Now, they're not Muslim, right? But they do believe in covering your head. This is a Bridge of Peace. I'm going to kind of give you an idea of what happens in an old country that starts to build stuff without architectural discipline. This is a beautiful bridge. It's a glass bridge over the Kuri River that runs through Tbilisi, but also basically runs through the middle of the country. Bridge of Peace, beautiful bridge at night, it lights up and it looks like a disco. But you just have to understand the weirdness of the culture. This is the entrance, the old entrance to the Sioni Cathedral. This cathedral was built in the 6th and 7th century AD. My first trip to Georgia, there was a laboratorian from the Centers for Disease Control that was of Russian heritage, and he read, there's some wording up there, that's an original piece that was in the first cathedral. Now this cathedral, because of the way Georgia was invaded so many times, was basically ripped down and rebuilt several times over its lifetime, but that's original to the original cathedral. Golden arches. Hey, have you ever seen a McDonald's that looks like that? It's a country of fairly young people. They have McDonald's, they have Hard Rock Cafe. My last day in Georgia, we're racing home a different way from the consulate area, and I run by this Hard Rock. We drive by this Hard Rock and I go, oh crap, there's a Hard Rock here. Now, I have a few quirks in my scabbard. Well, one of them is I collect Hard Rock shirts from everywhere I go. So if there's a Hard Rock Cafe, I have a shirt. I have a stack about this high. My last one was in Tbilisi, and I haven't been to any other new place that has a Hard Rock, but that's one of the things I collect. And all my kids say, what are you going to do with those? I said, well, probably nothing, but when I die, you guys can have them and figure out what you're going to do with all my Hard Rock shirts. But Georgia's known for its cuisine. I never suffered a bad meal over there. The top left is what's called khinkali. It's a dumpling. It's a filled dumpling. And I probably won't get back to it, but I have a great story about khinkali in one of my field visits. Down in the lower left is puri. That's their bread. And that's the normal way they make it. That's a big stone kiln. And they roll it out, and they get it ready, and that kiln is super hot. And they just slap it on the side, and they let it cook. And up there is another puri, that's called khachpuri, and it is actually a cheese-filled bread. They have a lot of bread over there. If you like bread, you're going to like that. But that's cheese-filled, and that actually has egg in it too. It's kind of one of their delicacy khachpuris. So I'm not a super dog lover. This slide actually does have meaning. So if you go to the State Department site and you talk about Georgia, and they talk about, if you need to get vaccines or anything when you go over there, you don't need vaccines. But if you're going to stay in the country more than 30 days, they recommend one vaccine. What do you think it is? Rabies. The dogs have rabies over there. It's endemic. And you see that little tag on that gold dog? Well, that means it's been rabies vaccinated. But the first time I was there, after I figured, the science in me goes, okay, I'm going to figure this out. So every dog I went up to, if it had a tag, I would look at it, and I would figure out if it was an active rabies tag or not. Well, they had multiple colors, and I'm sure most dogs were rabies vaccinated once, and that was good enough, which may scientifically be enough, but we're not going to test it, right? So that one doesn't have a rabies tag. That one does. So a little bit about safety in this old Tbilisi area. The Georgians don't like to get working too early in the morning. So we never started work before 9:30. That terrible life. I'd get up, I'd work out, and I'd go for a walk. Scared as I've ever been in these little tiny streets is when you're walking down a street and there's a pack of dogs walking up the street. And that's the most fear I had throughout my whole trip in Georgia, was I was going to get bit by a dog, come home to post-exposure rabies vaccinations. So let's talk a little bit about Georgia now. It's an old country, rich history. You can see the Georgian culture dates back to the 7th millennium BC. Bronze Age started about the 6th millennium BC. We're talking 3,000 years before Christ, okay? That's a long time. It's been under Roman, Persian, Ottoman control, other than the Soviet control that we all know of. Roman control, it was a Christian country in 330 AD. But then the Persians rolled through and things changed. It's interesting, throughout medieval times, they've been conquered so many times. But in 1783, Catherine the Great, have you ever heard of that? I mean, you know, that she's in the history books, a Russian, Catherine the Great, guaranteed Georgia's independence as long as you basically said, you will adopt a pro-Russian orientation. That's 1783. So basically the Russians very much started to influence Georgia back that far. Late 1800s, up until 1918, the unrest finally ended up with an independent Georgia. Now, no one's really independent. Georgia was only independent because a patriarchal country decided to help them stay that way. Guess who that was? What was going on in the 1918s, and what was right before that? What was happening in Germany? Germany pushed their influence out and said, you guys want to be independent? That's fine. You're going to be independent with us helping you be independent. So the end of World War II, or World War I, guess who lost? Germany. So they stayed an independent state for 3 years under British control. And finally, it's interesting, and I'm not enough of a historian to really know the British Empire and all the stuff that they did, but that time in Georgia, that 3 years, was a brutal time. The British people were not good to the Georgians. They finally kicked them out. All but one coastal country, Batumi. That's the last thing that got kicked out. 1921, interesting time. The Soviet Red Army invades Georgia. Who was in charge of the Soviets at the time? It was Lenin, right? Lenin didn't order the invasion of Georgia. A guy named Joseph Stalin did, who was one of Lenin's up-and-comers. This guy was up and coming, and so Joseph Stalin ordered the Red Army to invade and basically install a Soviet regime in Georgia. Joseph Stalin was born in Georgia. He was born in Gorky, about 40 miles upriver, up the Kuri River. And so he was a Georgian. But under Soviet control and everything that was starting to happen, he basically ordered, without Lenin saying he could, he ordered the invasion of Georgia. That started a long Soviet occupation, and they were part of the USSR. Georgia was part of the USSR. Mikhail Gorbachev, you guys, I know you're young. I'm old and I know all these names from just even osmosis going by the TV, but Gorbachev time in the USSR was disintegrated. The Soviet Union was disintegrating. During that disintegration, Georgia started to get some legs under them, and they got their independence again. And these were bloody independence. When they went after independence, there was bloodshed. about 3 blocks from that courtyard that I was able to stay at, they had a Soviet museum. And I went through there, I had about 3 hours. I spent time going through there looking at this. And the history books, I'm sure, if you'd get into them, show this, but this was a bloody regime. The Soviets were very, very hard on the Georgians. So by 1991, Georgia declares independence. Edward Shevardnadze, who was a Russian, ends up taking over as the president of Georgia with very strong ties to Russia. A little scary for the United States because this is a strategic issue. So I wanted to throw this in. You remember all those beautiful pictures at the beginning? Even the McDonald's look pretty. This is what the Soviet bloc countries end up looking like. These block apartments. It's really sad. When we'd leave the old Tbilisi area and go out to the Ministry of Ag or some of these other places, you'd start to drive by all of these ugly apartments in disrepair, half occupied. Some of them you could see the windows were blown out of them. You could see occupation on some floors and not on others. I mean, that's what you get. But you're also talking about a per capita income of about $5,000 in Georgia. So you're not going to be spending $800 on an apartment. All right. As Georgia moved deep in towards independence, there were some big challenges that they faced. First of all, they have 2 states or regions that literally felt more aligned with Russia than they did with the Georgians, and they ended up staying with them and letting Russia occupy them. So Uzbekia and South Ossetia are basically full of Russian troops to this day. When you go to Georgia, they basically say, these are where you don't go. So independence, and I'm sure from a civics perspective, even a political science perspective, independence comes hard early. So Shevardnadze was very much aligned with Russia. So in 2003, the Rose Revolution started, and that's what it's called, and it was led by US dollars. We worked to get rid of Shevardnadze. So we instill this Saakashvili as president. We basically bought him into his presidency. He was very corrupt. He was very much aligned with the United States. He did everything he could to stop Georgia from aligning at all with Russia. He was doing what the Americans, the United States, wanted him to do, right? I mean, this is the power struggle that happens through this time. Well, in 2012, this billionaire, I have to slow down because I talk fast and then I try to say these Georgian names and my mouth is gonna wreck. But Bidzina Ivanishvili, who is a billionaire, a Georgian billionaire who went to Russia and made all his money, came back and said, we have a corrupt government. It's too aligned with the United States. So he starts his Dream Coalition, and in 2012, he basically becomes the prime minister after taking over the parliament. So his party became in to rule in parliament, and he automatically became the prime minister. And this is weird, and Peter, I don't know, this is crazy geopolitics, but they started out as with a presidency, and automatically during this time, during the Saakashvili and this Dream Coalition, they ended up with a prime minister and a president. And then When the Dream Coalition put their president in place, Ivanishvili basically says, I'm retiring and I'm going to put my own prime minister in place. And he basically changed the Constitution at that point and said, our power is going to be vested in the prime minister and not the president. So there were some big shifts in power during this time. So I guess this is what happens when you have a new country. You go through some of this strife. So, why all the history? Other than it's pretty cool, and I get into this stuff. I'm a scientist, I'm a public health guy, and all of a sudden I get into this history of nation forming, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I missed my calling. This is pretty cool stuff. My son's a political scientist, and he loves this stuff, but he was a political scientist that went public health. So, I can see where he gets it, and I can see where you get it. This is really amazing things. And I'll talk to you about some conspiracy stuff coming up, which we all love. So, why the history? When they became independent in '91, they didn't know who they wanted to ally with, right? Was it going to be Russia? Was it going to be the United States? Those are the power brokers, right? They didn't know where they wanted to be. They had one president, Shevardnadze, who was very Russian aligned. Then they had Saakashvili, who was American aligned. And then the Dream Coalition came in with a billionaire from Russia. Oh, I forgot to tell you what this is. Billionaire from Russia who basically took over with his coalition, and they're moving towards alignment with Russia. They want to trade with Russia. This is not a great picture, but if you see that structure kind of up in the top, that's a glass mansion. That's his mansion. If you ever get on site, look this guy up and look at this mansion. He's got exotic animals. He is amazing. When he did all this in 2012, he was 56 years old. Not a very old man. This United States and Georgia, United States, this is a strategic partner with the United States. Can you see why? That Aspekia up in the corner, you know why the Russians wanted to hold that? There's a pipeline running to the Black Sea from Russia there. Strategic alliances. Russia had a big influence. What's going on in Russia right now? The Crimea? They are taking over strategic areas to try to keep, without making too much opinion, I think this is fairly fact-based, the Russians are taking strategic initiative to protect them in a global environment. So back to this. We want them as a strategic partner. We basically want Russia to stay out of Georgia. That's what the United States wants. But Georgia has their own aspirations. They want to be in the European Union and NATO. Now, Georgia's a long ways from Europe proper, isn't it? You got to go up over Poland, then finally get over to what we all consider Europe, although Poland's in NATO now. But they want to be in the European Union. One of the things that they want to be able to do in the European Union is to freely trade their produce, their food. So that's where I start to pick up. Let's talk a little bit more about journey into the EU, because it's a long, hard journey. In 2014, Georgia signed an association agreement with the EU. That association agreement, if they can fulfill it, will end up giving them this DFCTA certification, Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement. That means they can freely trade everything that Georgia has without anything getting in the way. That's how the EU works, right? Chapter 4 of this agreement is basically the food safety agreement. You will have an equivalent food safety system to the EU or we don't want you. It is spelled out in chapter 4. Because of where they want to be, they have worked very hard in gaining alliances with the United States. Now, for as many problems and foibles as we have as a country, we have the greatest food safety system in the world, by far. Talk a little bit about why that is a little later. But we have a great food safety system. So Georgia is happy to have United States, Americans go over there and help them build their food safety system. So why do they have so far to travel? Why does Georgia have so far to travel in building a food safety system? And I'll have a lot more to say about that later. Their food safety system, when they were a Soviet bloc country, was called a GHOST system. And it basically means state standards. And if you ever knew anything about the Russians, it's all about state standards. We have these standards. Very bureaucratic system, very much based on end product testing. To me, I will shed some editorial on you here in a minute, but it's not scientific, it's not risk-based. We are a risk-based public health system. We attack risk. We don't attack anything that doesn't have risk. That's crazy. We don't have time for that. So, end product testing. Ever watch a movie about medieval times and they pull this serf out and they feed him food before the king has it? That's end product testing, okay? If the guy dies, the king's not going to eat the food. Now, that system just doesn't work. And I could spend hours talking to you about why it wouldn't work, but those systems just don't work. It's very interesting that this type of system I found when I went to Dubai and did some of the same type of work with Emiratis. They have this end product testing. I was in Abu Dhabi actually, and I was in their lab, and I walked into this one part of the lab, and it was filled with all kinds of different products, food products, under refrigeration. I said, what are you going to do with all this stuff? Well, when we finally catch up, we're going to test it. I said, well, that's good. Where's the rest of the food? Being consumed? It's a crazy system. But you see this system in other places, and it's to me, it's very archaic. It doesn't work. When they became independent, remember in the first thing I said something about laissez-faire? Well, when they first became independent, they were so tired of the Soviet bureaucracy. They dismantled their food safety system. No regulations, nothing. So all of a sudden, when they come out in 1991, they have no food safety standards. None. They tried to get some in 2005, but nothing. By 2007, they had gutted their standards to the point where there was nothing there. So they didn't do very well. But this EU, this hangover with the European Union was so great that in 2011, they basically built the National Food Agency, the NFA, and it's part of the Ministry of the Ag of Georgia. You see this a lot in countries where they'll have English and their language on placards. The UAE every sign has English and Emirati on it, so you can always know where you are. But this is typical. This is not typical. This was in one of our field visits. This is one of their NFA cars, their National Food Agency cars. So 2011, they said, hey, we're doing it. We're going to do this. We're going to get this done. So why did I get to go to Georgia? Other than the fact that CDC dragged me to Dubai for a month or a week. That was pretty fun. I had more fun over there, but I am a subject matter expert in food. I mean, Peter, you saw that on there. I like food safety. I love foodborne outbreak response. So that's what I do. I have a really close working relationship with CDC, and I understand their philosophy. Remember about that end product testing? CDC we in the United States believe that you're going to find a foodborne pathogen coming out of you much easier than you're ever going to find it in food. Food's a super complex matrix. To go out and test food, bacteriologically test food, or try to pick up a virus in food, it's darn near impossible. It's a crapshoot, and I hate to use that term because stool is where we find this stuff. But it is really not easy to find pathogens in food. We usually we detect outbreaks because we find sick people through surveillance. That's our philosophy. Back to these ghost systems that we find out there, they don't believe in that. You're sick, you're sick. You know, we believe you're going to find it, you're going to respond, and you're going to solve it way faster than you're ever going to do trying to test food. Unless it's so grossly contaminated that it's back to the surf. You know, you give him something and he just starts to spaz out and he's on the ground. Don't give it to the king. That's not going to do very well. So we have a philosophy in the United States. That philosophy is that C4, that guidelines. That guidelines has been rewritten in 5 different languages because our doctrine, our public health doctrine in the United States is very much in front of where most of the world is. So C4 is a really important tool for most countries to understand how to respond to outbreaks. So, what's the CDC doing in Georgia? CDC maintains an office, that's the placard right inside the door, maintains an office in Tbilisi as part of the Global Health Security Agenda. And I put this is my other opinion that I'll give you in a second. But we maintain an office there as part of the Global Health Security Agenda. It also includes Azerbaijan and Armenia in that office. And the CDC in country partners with the Ministry of Health, or I usually call it Labor, Health, and Social Affairs. I usually call it Ministry of Health. Ministry of Ag, where NFA is, and the National Center for Disease Control and Public Health, which is called the NCDC when you're in there. Here's my pitch, and I'm not trying to be overly political, but this global health security agenda, I don't know if you've been following the news, it's going away. This has been cut out of the CDC budget. And that second, I'm going to read that second sentence to you. A weakness in the public health and surveillance system for infectious disease detection in any one country is a threat to all countries. We move rapidly around the world. You remember SARS? Remember SARS not that long ago? Remember Ebola? We all know Ebola. We should know Ebola because we have a BSL-4 lab right down the road here in Hamilton. I mean, we look at some pretty nasty biological agents down there. So you need to think about how important it is for us to be in these other countries. And as part of that, well, I'm going to get to a part of this, but this is the placard on the outside of the NCDC building. The CDC building is a small building right behind this big structure. Old building, probably built in the 40s. And you can tell when you're in it, it's a cruddy building. But, interesting, there's a little museum in this building. And when we do our presentations, I have to do presentations to NCDC and Ministry of Ag on both of my trips. We'd haul ourselves out of the office in the back, the building in the back the CDC maintains, and we'd run through and go up to the 3rd floor of the NCDC building. And I went by here. The first time I went by there, I was with a guy named Dale Morse, who's doctor now with CDC, was in New York. I said, Dale, what's going on in here? He said, Joe, take a closer look. And if you look around there, most of this equipment's really old. There's a centrifuge, and there's an electron microscope back there, a real old one, first generation. And then there's these little shadow boxes with mice in them. What do you think this building was used for when it was a Soviet Union building? This is the building, this is now their national public health building that was bioweaponizing anthrax and plague. Kind of weird to be in a building, a public health building, that you know was used prior to NCDC for bioweapons. Kind of weird, huh? You don't think it happens? That's for real. I took these pictures. So yeah, that's just a little museum in the building, and this is where they bioweapon plague and anthrax. That was what Georgia did. That was the Soviet bloc country that did a lot of the bioweaponing. It's real. This isn't scary. Scary comes later. I'll talk to you a little bit more scary later. This is what was happening in the Soviet bloc countries. Back to the CDC. Remember that global health initiative, that global health agenda? As part of that, the CDC really, one of their main focuses over there was this South Caucasus FELTP, which is Field Environmental and Laboratory Training Program. They would bring Georgians, Azerbaijanians, and Armenians in, and they would teach them public health. 2-year program. They would find those people that were kind of like me, afflicted with public health, and they'd bring them in and say, hey, we want you to be part of this CDC team, the Global Security, Health Security Initiative agenda. So this is a main thing that CDC was trying to do over there. Now, my last day there in 2017 was FELTP graduation. Now, this was a big thing. The guy on the far left, he's the director, he is the Minister of Ag for Georgia. The Minister of Ag, that's a cabinet level position, and he was there. The two people on the far right are actually CDC personnel assigned there through the embassy. Beth Skaggs, the blonde, was being sent back to the other Georgia in Atlanta the day after we left. But this is a big deal. And it's one of the things, some of the presentations, they're doing work on anthrax. I mean, this is real stuff. They were doing anthrax. This presentation here, you can barely read it, but they were doing enteric disease surveillance. Now, the United States does the best enteric disease surveillance in the world. But if we can teach other countries to do that, we're going to be able to detect disease a lot faster. So this is what we do. This is what we try to instill in the South Caucasus FELTP. A little bit about their public health system versus ours. And you guys might not know what our public health system looks like. You might get vaccinations at the health department here. You may not. We'll talk about that later too. The United States has a system, federal, state, and local system. Most of public health happens at the local level. I ran a health department for 20 years, just north of here. Ellen Leahy, the health officer for Missoula City County Health Department, about the same tenure as me. I was good and got out a little bit faster than she did. In Georgia, it's a federal system. It's basically a federal system. They have some regional stuff going on, but most of it's not. And the stuff that is going on regionally is usually hospital-based, which is not a bad thing. It's just the way it is. From a food safety perspective, we have the FDA, the USDA, we have state departments of ag, state departments of health, and local health departments, right? They basically have one organization, Ministry of Ag. Now, some would say that's a better system than the United States because USDA does, some things, FDA does eggs, out of the shell eggs the USDA does. It's crazy how we regulate food safety in the United States, but it works. It's not the most efficient system in the world, but it works. CDC is the federal epidemiologist in the United States. Now, that doesn't mean there's not state and local counterparts, but they are. NCDC, which you saw they're building, they are moving, which is really cool because that is a crazy building, are their epidemiologists. Maybe a little bit about their epidemiology system. So they have two distinct cohorts of professionals in Georgia. Those that worked in the Soviet Union and those that didn't. If you worked in the Soviet Union, you can tell them, not that they're just old, but they are bureaucrats. They don't talk. They don't communicate with other people. They are very withdrawn. They don't like to talk about their programs. They're Soviet bloc scientists. And then you get these new Georgians who, a lot of them have gone through this FELPT training, and they are out there. They are the people you want to work with. When I go over there and I get to work with these younger ones, it's fun. When I have to sit in meetings with these old leaderships that are literally from the Soviet bloc country, you want to smash your head against the table. It's just so disheartening to have to work with them because they're just bureaucrats. CDC lab, state and local. There is one big government lab in the Republic of Georgia, and it's called the Lugar Center, named after a senator from the United States, Richard Lugar. Weird about that. This is the Lugar Center. Huge building. It was funded by what we call DTRA, Defense Threat Reduction Agency. That's our military defense threat reduction agency. That's DTRA. It was built by Bechtel. Bechtel's a company in the United States. Well, international, but they're based in the United States and they do a lot of warfare building stuff. DTRA is actually the funding that took me over there. It's not a bad thing. I'm not trying to make it bad. It's just we have this DTRA all over the world. This is how this is how we thwart risk. So my funding came out of DTRA. Some of my funding that I get through LSU as an adjunct instructor comes from DTRA. It's not bad. It's not a bad thing. Bechtel's not always good, but interesting. When I told you there would be that time when you kind of wonder if everything's above board. This is an American-built complex. Back in the day was run by the Americans. And when it first opened, there were some workers that were in there that were poisoned. And it looked like they had sarin gas poisoning. So there was this whole conspiracy theory is we were doing chemical and biological warfare out of this structure. Now, I don't believe it because I can't confirm it, but it's a great read. It's you get on some of these websites that had some, people that were in place, and they're like, yeah, this basically was being run by the United States. And then the weird thing is the Turks sold the sarin gas to Syria that killed all the Syrians. Well, where'd the Turks get the sarin gas? That's the conspiracy theory. Go look it up yourself. I am not buying into it completely, but those are fun reads. The part of the LSU that I worked through was when we had the anthrax scare after 9/11 in the United States. NCBRT was dragged straight into that because NCBRT at the time was a lot of old bioweaponers from from the Cold War era. They were working for the company or the university division I was working for. Well, there was a link with the anthrax to one of the instructors, professors, adjunct instructors, like I hold, at NCBRT. So you got to get into it. It's kind of fun. It may not all be true, but it's good reading. So, my goal, because I'm an epidemiologist and a food safety freak, I very much wanted to work with NCDC and NFA on early detection, whether that be through complaints, lab identified. I wanted to work with early detection stuff. They wanted me to do field visits because they thought I could go into any restaurant and tell them if they were going to have a foodborne illness here. Well, maybe from a risk-based perspective I could, but I couldn't. I mean, it's predictive, but it's not for sure, right? So, my first field visit in the Republic of Georgia was to Domino's Pizza. Now, if you know anything about Pizza Hut and Domino's Pizza and McDonald's, they have construction standards that are pretty rigorous, really rigorous. So I walk into Domino's, and I could have been walking into any Domino's in the United States. Stainless steel, 3-compartment sinks, beautiful refrigerators, and I get to go there because I'm going to be able to demonstrate to them that Domino's is a real issue. Let me tell you, there was a real issue there, and they couldn't find it. Now I could. Now, I don't slap myself on the back. I've been a food safety guy for 30 years, okay? So I walk in the back. Tbilisi has terrible water pressure. So in the back, they have this cistern and another pump pressurizing the system so they can wash their hands and wash their stuff. There was no check valves on there. So they could have backflow of crap from Domino's into their water supply. It was a terrible setup. And for the life of me, I kept telling them, there's no check valves, there's no backflow prevention, there's nothing here. Because it's not something that Domino's would have put in, right? This is what they had to put in country to get water pressure. So all hell breaks loose, pardon my language, because someone had a coat thrown on a bunch of dry stored cans. They were having a fit. They didn't understand the risk. They didn't get the risk. I got the risk. The water system was the risk. I kept telling them, let's talk about the water system. They wanted to talk about the coat. And this is amazing. This is literally the exit interview. I am out of it by then. I wanted nothing to do with this. I was like, we need more time. These two ladies are lead officials for NFA. They're medical doctors, trained in the Republic of Georgia, but they're medical doctors. Those three are all Domino's people. Now, we couldn't do the exit interview until the manager came in, because me, the American who was in there, he'd say, there's someone in here and he's going to make us do things that we don't know how to do. So this is the exit interview. I just stood back and had a laugh. I just couldn't. They kept trying to give me pizza. It's a different culture. They always bribing you with stuff, but I just stood back and watched this. The two down there are environmental health specialists, and there's one more of the NFA people on the other side. So that was the exit interview. These field visits to restaurants were all crazy like this. They were nuts. The second one we went to on this day had gyro ovens, the Greek sandwich ovens. They had 4 ovens going. And they were serving 100 sandwiches every 30 minutes. They were cooking, literally. I walked in, as a good sanitarian, I asked where could I wash my hands. They took me to this dingy bathroom in the back with this black sink. That was the only hand sink in the whole place. I said, don't you have a hand sink out here? Oh, no. I looked around and I'm going, where's your sinks? They had one sink in the whole place, 4 Euro ovens, cooking like crazy, no refrigeration. And I am fit to be tied. They literally, the NFA people, one of them had to take me out because I kept telling them, you've got to have this and you've got to have that. And I wasn't being crazy about it. I mean, I'm supposed to be a diplomat, right? I was going to try to act diplomatically. One of the people that worked at the CDC and I talked, and his name is Georgi, and he's a cool guy. He's a veterinarian. And he comes up to me and he says, well, Joe, by the end of the day, they don't have any food. And if they do have some food, they just put it out back for all the dogs. I said, this isn't public health, Georgi. This is not what you do. That was the worst place I went. My second, and we didn't get many done, but my second trip over there, my field trip day, I went to a place that had 3 separate kitchens. They cooked food everywhere. And they actually did a pretty good job. They had sinks and everything else. But I walked into the walk-in cooler, and I wanted to take a picture of this, but it was too creepy. They had this dead bird, still had its feathers, very ornamental looking chicken up there, and below it they had all of their pre-cooked stuff. And I'm like, oh God, I cannot eat here. But in this one place, true story, all true stories. I hope you know that. But so they have this one place where they make khinkali. It's probably, as big as this front room down on this level, where they do khinkali. That's that dumpling that I showed you. And I said, and I literally made a comment to the manager as I walked by. I said, I love khinkali. So we're in, there's 4 of us in this walk-in looking at this dead bird, and I get tapped on the shoulder. And it's the manager. He said, you come here. So I'm going, oh crap, I'm getting thrown out. So he brings me over to this table, and he's got 8 khinkali there. And they're famous for wine, but they make a potato vodka that's hideous. So they had this khinkali and this drink set out for me, and they said, you stay here and eat. So, I mean, this is in the middle of the kitchen. I go, I can't eat in here. This is not a good food regulation. So he took it out further, and I had one of the khinkali. They were really good. They're awesome. But it's just a different culture. One of my, their beers, they don't have they don't have the microbrews. You know, if you're into every moose drool and everything, they have 2 types of beers, dark and Pilsner over there. I went to one place, and literally, at the exit interview, they brought out this tray of fruit and their Georgian vodka. And we sat there and did the exit interview, eating fruit and drinking vodka. You don't do that in the United States. And you don't want to be a bad diplomat. So, and I am almost done, literally. I am 2 slides from being over. A couple things about their system. They have well over 10,000 retail food establishments in the Tbilisi area. They have 50 inspectors, and they always go out together. And they always go out announced. If you know anything about our system, they're not getting any work done. They barely get to anything over there. Why they do that? I said, don't do 2 inspectors. You're not in peril over here. And it's always a male. The female is the one who does all the writing, and the male is the one that protects her. Crazy. I know females that do food safety inspections that I wouldn't screw around with. They have no permitting and licensing system. They still have not evolved to the point where they have a system of registration for their food service. Vendors just come and go. Once you'll find one set up, then they're gone the next day. I notice critical structural violations all over the place. But remember, it's only been since 1991 where they just crap canned everything. And then it wasn't until the NFA was formed that they really started to build a food safety system again. That's not that far long ago. We're talking about 7 years. They don't find foodborne illness over there. And the main reason is because they don't test. If people are sick, they say they're sick, and that's it. If they come back the third or fourth time with bloody diarrhea, they might do a stool sample, but they don't test. You can't find it if you don't test for it. They also don't follow up on people calling in. Their system's needs a lot of work. They need a lot of work. And it was only in 2016 that they actually put out a proposal to try to get a food safety code written. They sent it to me, they wanted me to do it, but they wanted to give the vendor $20,000 and they had to go over there twice. That's half of that 20 going in country 2 times. So I mean, I was gonna do it, but I couldn't afford it. I'd have lost a lot of money. So, the festival. NFA loved us so much that we had a Supra when we were there. This is like an 8-course meal. We probably drank, and I don't drink a lot of wine, but we probably drank 4 liters of wine between 8 of us. That's a lot of wine. Their wine is incredible. That wine I showed you at the beginning, that's my private stock. I still have a few bottles left. So, I mean, I could talk to you a lot more about a country that's just starting to grow a food safety system. They're really just starting to grow their own government. They're getting there. It's going to take a long time. Our public health system is way, for food safety, milk, food, dairy sanitation, we've been at it for over 100 years. They haven't been at it that long. They'll get there. But last thing, read it. I don't know where you guys are on your vaccines, but best part about getting a vaccine is not the free lollipop. It's the part where you don't get sick and die. That's my public health message. Hopefully you all got your flu vaccine and not gonna get very sick. So I'm done. Any questions?
Thanks, Johnny. We have time for maybe one question other than mine. Does anybody have a question?
So, given what sounds like just fundamental differences at this point between risk perception and risk mitigation, how do you think the EU feels about them wanting to jump on board in meeting, I forget what the term was, but the EU's food safety standards?
Well, first of all, Georgia has a strong desire to do it. And now I actually went on a LinkedIn site back there to see what was going on, and they actually have EU staff working in the NFA now. So I think they're pretty dang serious about it, but I can tell you it takes a long time to change the culture of food safety. Quick one?
Is there a disconnect between the regulations from the EU and the CDC?
Yeah, a little bit of a disconnect, but if they can get a 90% into the United States, they'll make the EU. EU is not based. It's not based in so much pathogen detection as the United States, but EU is still a good system.
So my question, and this is a question I ask for almost everybody who gives a talk at this lecture series. Is there something, anything, that you learned from your work in Georgia that you could bring back here, that you felt that was something that you picked up there that would be some way help improve things here, either in your role in Flathead, as the director of the Flathead Health Department, or in terms of food safety? Is there even one thing that you learned there that you could bring back? No, not really. I mean, I think that there are some inherent food processes that they do very well. Okay, so like their bread making. I mean,
Never felt bad eating bread over there. But when you're dealing with a country that has lots of brucellosis because they don't vaccinate their cattle, that they have lots of rabies because they don't have preventative systems in place, they have a bunch of Shigella problems. Shigella is usually a person-to-person transmitted pathogen. They could do a lot more with just hand washing and some of the things that we struggle with too. We have norovirus, right? The stomach flu that runs around. There are some personal things that I think I'm better at, patience, when I'm dealing with people that aren't literally to the United States level of public health service, and communication. I mean, I enjoy communicating. I hope you saw that. But I really enjoy when you're dealing with another country with their own language, who really tries very hard to speak English, but you still have disconnects in communication, especially in the science and around food safety. So I'm probably better for it, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks again, Joe. So let me just, before we leave tonight, let me just make mention of what's coming up next week. So next week we have Martin Blair. He's the Executive Director of the World Institute for Inclusive Communities. And he's going to talk about his work building inclusive educational opportunities for Kenyan children who are deaf and blind. So that's next week at the same time. So if you have any questions for Joe that you'd like to ask him on a one-to-one basis, please go right ahead and do that. Thanks for coming.